Hello, welcome back to Teen Story Share. This week we're continuing The Princess Curse by Merrie Haskell. If you missed chapters 1 and 2, those will be linked down below. Chapter 3. When we had arrived at Castle Sylvian 3 weeks before, having walked all the way from Moldavia, I'd been disappointed to discover that the resident herb master already had an apprentice. But Brother Cosman took me on anyway. At first I'd been pleased, but then I realized he did so because I was already well trained in herbalism by the convent, and he could lie abed longer if he had me to do half his work. The other half of his work had already settled on the shoulders of his first apprentice, Dedina. When my pa had said that Brother Cosman would be wanting me that morning, he was mistaken. It was Dedina who would want me. Brother Cosman went back to bed after the audience with the princess consort. I am being truthful here and not bad-mouthing Brother Cosman out of dislike or something, but of his vows of chastity, obedience, and poverty, it was hard to tell which he took least seriously. He was a goodish man, a bad monk, and a middling herbalist. He thought Bettany was the best cure for everything. "Where have you been?" Dedina asked, frazzled. She was 14, a year older than me, though she'd been learning her art less long. "I've not seen Brother Cosman all morning." I hurried in, past Brother Cosman's shelf of wondrous books, 7 herbals, 4 of them press-printed, and settled down at my work table. Princess Daciana had a question about an ingredient in the princess's bath herbs this morning. "A question? Why? What did you put in?" "Wild cabbage." She obviously didn't see the significance. "That's a terrible bath herb," she told me, and went back to powdering betony for Brother Cosman. I sighed. Betony is a fine plant. Some people call betony heal-all, but to me it represents the lazy kind of healing, like the barbers who think that opening up a vein is good for every disorder, even for wounded soldiers gushing blood. The whole of betony, from root to flower, is medicinal, and it is good for fevers, spasms, peeing more, peeing less, high blood, bad stomachs, worms, flatulence, excessive bleeding, and even wounds. But betony works much better paired with a second, complementary herb, and it's not suitable for everything, nor is it always the best cure. But I was determined to behave, so I resolved not to take up the betony conversation with either Dedina or Brother Cosman again for at least a week. I owed the monk for showing up in the solar at all, even though he hadn't actually spoken in my defense, and frankly I had worried that perhaps my diatribes against the excessive use of the plant were what had gotten me summoned by the princess in the first place. I worked hard the rest of the day. I took dried rose petals to the laundresses to layer in with the clean clothing. I made up a hair rinse of rosemary and nettles for half the castle. I helped Dedina powder wormwood to deter mice, pennyroyal to repel fleas. I made a batch of sore leg ointment for Brother Cosman's donkey, who was getting on in years. When Brother Cosman finally showed up, he directed me to make up sachets of southernwood and tansy to keep moths at bay. I gathered days' eyes, lemon balm, and santolina for the footmen to mix with sweet rushes for the floor of the great hall, and savory, rosemary, rue, and roses for the aromatic posies the princesses carried every evening. After this, the monk spent some time teaching us to work with clover root and cherry bark to make a remedy for coughs. When he stepped out for the privy, Dedina said, "Brother Cosman told me why you put the wild cabbage in the bathwater, Reveka. You'd best stay away from the princesses." I set my jaw mutinously and continued pounding apart the threads of a clover root with my pestle. "You don't know how many people have been lost," she continued. "It's not worth it." "The dowry's not worth it?" I asked. "Because it seems worth it, not to have to marry some clod who will make you bear too many babies, or not to live alone and have no one to care for you in your old age." "Some clod? What do you want a dowry for if not to get married?" "I want to join a convent, of course." "Oh." Dedina measured out the cherry bark she'd just powdered. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize you had a spiritual calling." I was ashamed to admit that I didn't, so I skipped answering that. I want to be the herbalist for an entire abbey, I told Didina. I want to have my own herbery, my own apprentices. To write a great herbal, I thought. But I didn't tell her that. It seemed more like a dream than a real plan. She squinted at the powder she had made. That takes a lot of money, you know. Only rich women join that kind of abbey. I know, I said, and pounded harder at my clover root. I'd known since I was a small child that the nuns weren't going to take me without a dowry, and I'd barely dared dream of my own herbery, a whitewashed room filled with northern sunlight and tall drying cabinets, where I reigned as mistress, and none gainsaid my method for preparing pomanders, or made too much of Bethany. Before there was this dowry to try for, I'd always figured I'd have to find a husband. I didn't think it would be too hard. I wasn't entirely homely by all accounts, and even if I were, plenty of homely women get homely husbands and make homely babies. But then what? What about my husband? What would he be? A cabinet maker? A blacksmith? A cobbler? The problem with marrying a craftsman is that the commerce becomes the wife's problem. And where did that fit in with my herbs? Nor could I see marrying a farming man beholden to some estate, any more than I could see marrying a soldier. My own ma's sad life bounced that notion right out of my head. No, the convent was the best choice for me, a place where I would have all the time I was supposed to be devoutly praying to think about herbs. I didn't really care for all the silence and singing and obedience, but my own herbery. Brother Cosman came back then and asked us questions about the properties of cherry bark, and we stopped talking. In short order, I assembled the evening's posies and went to deliver them to the princess's door. I arrived at the same time as Florin, the youngest of the cobbler boys. The castle employed 7 cobblers total, 6 to make 2 new pairs of slippers every day for the princesses, and 1 to make shoes for the rest of us. Florin was the newest apprentice to his master, like me, and like me, he was the one who had to venture off to the princess's tower. No one who could possibly avoid it went to the princess's tower, ever. I looked at Florin over my fragrant tray of flowers and herbs. He looked at me over his box of slippers. Do you ever think that maybe if we didn't replace their posies and slippers every night, they wouldn't do whatever it is that they do? I asked. Florin, who was just a bit older than me but had lived at the castle since he was born, shook his head. They tried that, he said. They tried everything. For a week, Prince Vasila refused them any slippers. The princesses made holes in their feet instead of their shoes. It was a week of blood and blisters and hobbling about. Why not move them out of the castle altogether? Because earthquakes, wind, terrible storms. Every time they try something, we spend a month clearing the debris and patching up the castle foundations. Well, I said, maybe they shouldn't let them go to bed at night? Florin shook his head. The curse is strong. The curse wants the princesses in the castle, in this tower, every night, no exceptions. Maybe separate them. No. Florin rolled his eyes. The castle's been cursed for 6 years. They tried everything you've thought up, twice, and 80 more things besides. What about... Florin wheeled about impatiently. Listen. You're what, 13? You aren't going to break the curse. Nobody is going to break the curse. And nothing good comes to them that try. A piece of advice, apprentice to apprentice? The curse don't hurt them that don't mess with it. So you don't mess with it, and grow up to be a journeyman herbalist. Now, knock. He jerked his chin toward the tower door. I was annoyed, but I knocked. Betty, the princess's maid, opened up to take Florin's box of shoes. Florin escaped swiftly, clearly having no intention of waiting for me. Usually, a second maid would have taken my flowers, but tonight she was not in attendance. I tried to place the tray of flowers on top of Florin's box, but Betty grimaced. Bring in the tray. I haven't got 6 hands, you know. So I followed her into the eastern tower. The princesses stood about in varying states of undress, preparing for the evening's meal and entertainment in their father's hall. In any other boudoir of 12 princesses, there would have been chatter and laughter. But all here was silence and strain, even though the princesses wore the most beautiful gowns of velvets, damasks, and silks. Nothing at all like my sturdy woolen skirts and apron. I set down the tray of flowers and turned to leave, but Betty asked, "Can't you stay?" "What for?" I whispered. "Help them with their flowers. You know all about flowers, right?" I started to say that I didn't think they'd want me, because I wanted to go down and get my supper. But then I realized there was no better time to investigate the curse further. What luck! And I'd almost thrown that luck away for sour soup and roasted carp. Okay, next chapter, we meet the princesses. Thanks for joining us for Teen Story Share. See you next week. Have a good weekend. Bye.